I want to know what kind of training Eichman received to be able to conclude that a small bruise on each side of Sophia's head was from being violently shaken. How do you know that? Adelaide Eichman told Jones that Sophia's death was a result of being violently shaken prior to her autopsy being performed, which showed no fractures or dislocations of Sophia's neck and spine. Hello, my name is Lindsay Ann, and this is Can't Stop, Won't Stop Warriors on YouTube. If you haven't already done so, you guys, please click my logo below and subscribe to Can't Stop, Won't Stop Warriors. It's free, and your subscription will help get Jennifer MEDZIE's story to more people. People who might be going through a similar situation. Maybe someone listening is in an abusive relationship or is witnessing abuse and doesn't know what to do or what the consequences might be for not reporting it. Please like and subscribe. In episode 17, you heard the shameful, in my opinion, testimony by two Pennsylvania state troopers. Mary Jane McGinnis and Kimberly Ronan should be ashamed of themselves. I don't know how they sleep at night. Today, you will hear from two of the three medical experts called to the stand by the prosecution, Abdulrezak Shakir and Adelaide Eichman. I will also give you some details on a lawsuit against Adelaide Eichman and how that went for her. There is a ton of pertinent information in this episode, you guys, and it may take a couple of listens and some note-taking to actually grasp all of it. I will show you photos of Sophia's bruises, as well as the slideshow that was shown in court. If you are listening to this on a podcast listening only platform, you will not be able to view the documents. In order to do so, please subscribe to my free YouTube channel, Can't Stop, Won't Stop Warriors. Day 2 of the trial. And at 8:57 a.m., in the law library, juror number 7, Larry Howe, announced that his wife's sister's girlfriend is the grandfather's sister. Bill Shaw didn't understand and asked for clarification. Judge Amerman stated, quote, "It's the same-sex thing," end quote. And Shaw responded, "Now I understand." Amerman then stated, quote, "Over an abundance of cautions, I'm going to excuse this gentleman," end quote. And alternate 1 was then moved to juror number 7. Okay, so the jury entered the courtroom at 9:10 a.m. and Shaw called Dr. Abdulrezak Shakir. He testified to being a deputy medical examiner, a pathologist in Allegheny County. He talked about his employment history and the role of a pathologist. Shakir testified to have performed, quote, over 1,000, end quote, medical examinations or autopsies over 29 plus years. The Commonwealth showed Exhibit 21, the autopsy report on the remains of Sophia Hoffman, performed on November 20th, 2013. But before talking about the autopsy report, Shaw showed the jury Exhibit 22, a summary of Dr. Shakir's history of employment and training. The court recognized him as an expert, and Shaw began with his direct examination. Dr. Shakir explained to the jurors the process for conducting an autopsy. They receive the body, they take photos, make medical notifications, make note of any evidence of trauma or any evidence of disease. Then they begin their internal investigation, taking samples of fluids and tissues. And when they get all of the information, they try to reach a conclusion regarding the cause of death. And beginning with the external examination, Dr. Shakir told the jury that there was evidence of blunt force trauma on various parts of the body. When asked what blunt force trauma means, he stated, quote, "A blunt force trauma is injury to the body with a blunt instrument. A blunt instrument could be anything. It could be a stick. It could be a blunt surface like a wall or like a floor, like something solid. So any trauma resulted from that, end quote. Then Dr. Shakir offered to describe the evidence of trauma in this case. Now, you guys, I really debated about showing photos during Dr. Shakir's testimony. And ultimately, I decided to. However, I have cropped them in order for the patient to be unrecognizable. Quote, "This photo shows a purple bruise on her right upper forehead along the hairline, 2.3 by 2 centimeters. Number 2 is a faint purple bruise of the left upper forehead, also under the hairline. This one is small, 0.7 by 0.4 centimeters. 3 is a faint purple bruise on the left temporal region. This one is small as well, 0.8 by 0.5 centimeters. And the 4th evidence of head trauma is a faint purple bruise, 4 by 1 centimeters in size, behind her right ear." End quote. After Dr. Shakir described those 4 bruises noted on Sophia's head, Bill Shaw stated, quote, "So that's 6 separate sites of blunt force trauma just on the head," end quote. Y'all, I counted 4, but I might be missing something. Or is this another exaggeration for the jury? I think this is important because Shaw then asked Dr. Shakir if 6 separate locations indicated 6 separate incidences of trauma. He stated, quote, "In other words, if there was blunt force trauma to the right side of the head, would that cause blunt force trauma to the left side of the head?" End quote. Dr. Shakir responded with no and agreed that it was separate events. I wonder if Shaw is really pushing for the jury to believe Jennifer hit or caused trauma to Sophia's head on 6 separate occasions. Remember when Shaw stated that Sophia was pummeled on a news clip?
This child was pummeled. And in our view, right from the get-go, this was no accident.
Okay, next, Dr. Shakir told the jurors about his findings of blunt force trauma of the trunk. To be clear, the doctor used the term ecchymosis and explained that that is another word for bruise. I am going to be using the term bruise for clarification purposes. Quote, "First, there are multiple faint purple bruises of the right upper chest interior shoulder. There is a purple bruise of the lateral left back, the back on the left side. Then there is a purple bruise of the lower right chest. There is a faint purple bruise of the right abdomen," end quote. So Shaw confirmed that there were 4 separate locations of blunt force trauma in Sophia's trunk area, and then they went to the extremities. Dr. Shakir's observations stated were, quote, "First, there was a faint purple bruise of the left upper arm. There was a purple-brown bruise of the inner surface of the left side of the left knee. There is a faint red-brown bruise on the right knee. And then there is a faint blue bruise of the left shin. And then faint red bruise of the lateral left side," end quote. Shaw then confirmed 6 separate locations of blunt force trauma to the extremities, to which Dr. Shakir stated, yes. Y'all, I counted 5, not 6. Again, I wonder if this was done intentionally. Next is the internal examination of Sophia. Dr. Shakir began by telling the jury that Sophia had undergone organ recovery. She had her liver removed, one of her kidneys, and also her spleen. And then he stated this, quote, "Apart from that, The forensic abdominal organs on the neck did not show any evidence of significant trauma, end quote. Next, the examination of the cranial cavity. In the examination of the central nervous system, after we open the skull up, that's the skin over the head, there was an area of subcutaneous hemorrhage. This is hemorrhage under the skin, subcutaneous hemorrhage of the frontal scalp. This is a tough, soft tissue, a tough tissue over the skull.
Is that important?
Oh, yes, definitely. That's important because this is also an indication of blunt force trauma. Dr. Shakir told the jury how they look under the skin and remove the scalp to observe what's going on. He noticed blood under the skin and over the skull in Sophia's case, which he said indicates a presence of a significant blunt force trauma to the head. He also noted swelling of the brain. And then he went into a lesson about the 3 layers of connective tissue covering the brain, and where he observed multiple areas of hemorrhage and or bleeding on the outermost and lowermost coverings of the brain. Shaw clarified for the jurors that the bleeding was observed between the surface of the brain and the skull. Dr. Shakir testified that the blood is an indication of blunt force trauma, which results in the swelling of the brain. In the brain is present in a confined cavity. It's not expandable. It's not like the abdominal area where the abdominal wall is flexible. What happens when the brain swells? The pressure inside the cranial cavity would increase. When this will result in interference with the blood circulation to the brain. The blood has a certain pressure. When the pressure in the brain increases, it will overcome the blood pressure, and the blood will not go easily into the brain. This will result in lowering the oxygenation of the brain itself, and this will result ultimately into what in the diagnosis in this one of the first diagnosis is that global hypoxic ischemic.
What does that mean?
It means like a disease or like an entity which is pathological, which is a disease. This is global, which means all over the brain. Hypoxic ischemic. Hypoxic means lower oxygenation. Ischemic means lower blood perfusion of the brain. So this disease of the brain happened as a result of lowered oxygenation of the brain due to lower blood circulation into the brain. This is as a result, as I already mentioned, of extensive swelling of the brain in lieu of the trauma. And this is the result of multiple injuries of the brain itself. And these are like, as mentioned in the final diagnosis, there were scattered neurons in the hippocampus and medulla. These are findings found in the microscopic examination of the brain. This brain, at the time of the autopsy, what we did, we put it in a solution to harden it because the brain is very soft. After it hardened, then it would be examined by the neuropathologist. One of the pathologists with me is Dr. Clark, who's the neuropathologist, and he was also performing the autopsy with me at this time. And he did that examination, the detailed examination of the brain. And in his examination, he found the following findings, which is Robert Donaldson took this opportunity to make an objection. Shocking? I know. He said, quote, "I'm going to object on the basis of hearsay. This doctor didn't complete that examination where he is testifying about somebody else in his office," end quote.
Dr. Shakir, did you make any other notable observations that are important for our discussion today? Anything else that was important in your examination of Sophia? Or is that pretty much the substance of the exam?
This is the most important part of the exam. Next, Bill Shaw asked Dr. Shakir to explain to the jury the meaning and cause of manner of death. Dr. Shakir's answer was this, quote, "The cause of death, like, for example, a person died as a result of myocardial infarction, then the cause of death would be myocardial infarction. If a person died as a result of bleeding and aortic aneurysm, the cause of death would be the bleeding aortic aneurysm. If a person died of a result of blunt force trauma of the chest, which resulted in broken ribs, broken other parts, and injuries to organs of the chest, so this is the cause of death, end quote. And this is what he told the jury about manner of death, quote, "We classified the deaths into 4 or sometimes 5 classifications. One of the classifications is that if the individual dies due to a natural process, the manner of death would then be classified as natural. If a person dies due to a trauma that happened in an accident, like a car accident or any sort of accident in this situation, that manner of death would be classified accidental. And the other manner of death will be if the person took his own life by himself, like commit suicide. The manner of death would be suicide. If the cause of death happened due to an action or inaction of another individual, the manner of death would be homicide. And sometimes if we cannot differentiate between one of two, then we put it as cannot be determined," end quote. He went on to say that his opinion is, quote, "The cause of death is she died as a result of global hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy resulting from blunt force trauma of the head. And at the time we finished this autopsy and finished the report, we put the manner of death as undetermined or cannot be determined," end quote. Next, Bill Shaw showed Commonwealth's exhibit number 23, the death certificate for Sophia Hoffman from the medical examiner's office. Now it's Robert Donaldson's turn for cross-examination. He asked Dr. Shakir when he completed the autopsy and confirmed that it took place after Sophia's organs had been harvested. November the 20th of 2013, and yes, this was after the harvesting of the organs. Dr. Shakir testified that the blunt force trauma, contusions, etc., could have possibly been caused by the harvesting of Sophia's organs. And it also could have occurred during the initial medical treatment on scene or Clearfield County Hospital emergency room or transport. Donaldson then showed defendants' exhibits A and B. The first document is a death certificate dated November 21st, 2013, stating the cause of death pending. Dr. Shakir's reasoning was this, quote, "After we did the autopsy and assessed the situation, we were unable to render a cause of death or a conclusion regarding the cause of death because we needed further examination of the tissues and further processing of these tissues, which takes weeks to be processed," end quote. Exhibit B is a death certificate dated May 29, 2014, where the cause of death states global hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy and blunt force trauma due to the blunt force trauma of the head. And this time, the manner of death said pending investigation. Dr. Shakir confirmed that at the top left corner of Sophia's death certificate, Exhibit B, it states final. And then he moved back to Commonwealth Exhibit 23 that Shaw had provided. Donaldson noted that this one is dated August 29, 2014. And on this one, he told Dr. Shakir, quote, "The cause of death remains the same as the one that was completed back in May. The manner of death, though, moves from pending investigation to could not be determined, and that the top left-hand corner also says final," end quote. Donaldson confirmed that there had been 3 death certificates for Sophia Hoffman. And that was it for cross. Time for redirect. Bill Shaw questioned Dr. Shakir about the possibility of blunt force trauma being caused by organ harvesting. It's possible. Usually with organs, we take photographs of the body before organ harvesting. And in fact, in this situation, the most important evidence of trauma reported was evidence of trauma in the forehead. These were on the presence of the hemorrhage in the head. This was even documented with a medical examination prior to the harvesting of the organs.
So the blunt force trauma to Sophia's head wasn't caused by the organ harvesting?
You are correct.
Just to be clear for the jurors, so did Sophia. Did she donate some organs following her death?
Yes.
And that procedure of organ donation, that wouldn't have been the cause of the blunt force trauma to her head?
No.
That was...
Okay, so Shaw also asked Dr. Shakir during redirect when Sophia would have become symptomatic with that type of injury, to which Shakir stated, quote, "With such a magnitude of injury, I would expect immediately," end quote. Shaw then read to the court part of Commonwealth's Exhibit 17, which is a transcript of a statement by Jennifer MEDZIE.
I take her out in the living room and I undress her. I take off her footy pajamas and then I take off her diaper, even though she's already peed in it. And I tell her to go and try to go pee anyway. She went pee. And then I said, "Are you done?" And she said, "Yeah." I told her to lay back down and I wiped her off. And then I put on her pull-up and her socks and her pants. And I started putting on her shirt. I got her one arm in and the other arm I didn't. She fell asleep or died or something on me. Now, is that description consistent with your medical findings?
No.
How come?
First of all, this situation, the change from being conscious and answering the questions reasonably well to completely unconscious, there has to be an event that happened between the two times.
Okay.
You cannot go like that. You cannot just go from a conscious to unconscious with the presence of this trauma to the head without an evidence of an act that resulted in the blunt force trauma of the head.
So if you know that now, or let me ask you this. If the defendant were the last person to be with Sophia, then she makes that statement. Does that change your opinion at all as to the cause, or more specifically, the manner of death? I don't want to put you on the spot.
This story of the child is answering the questions in a presentable way, and all of a sudden went into unconsciousness. There is something in between. I cannot believe that would happen by itself. So there is something in between. There would have to be a trauma that happened that resulted in this situation.
So would that change your opinion, or could that change your opinion as to the manner of death?
It would definitely indicate that that person who is giving their story is not telling exactly what is happening. What exactly happened?
That's all I have. Thank you.
And that was all for Shaw on the redirect. Donaldson on the recross said he had just a couple questions. He confirmed Dr. Shakir's opinion of blunt force trauma to the head as the manner of death and confirmed that it's possible that Sophia's injuries were an accident. Abdulrezak Shakir was excused. But before we get to the next witness, I want to go back to the coloring of Sophia's bruises. Dr. Shakir testified to Sophia having 4 purple bruises, 4 faint purple bruises, 1 purple-brown bruise, 1 faint red-brown bruise, 1 faint blue bruise, and 1 faint red bruise, along with, quote, multiple other small, faint purple bruises, end quote. This is important because the coloring of bruises can show a timeline of when the injury occurred. And according to AI, the initial stage is red. This is due to freshly injured blood vessels releasing red blood cells and is usually seen within the first 24 hours of the injury. Next is a blue-purple stage. As the blood loses oxygen, it changes to blue or purple, and this typically happens within 1 to 2 days after the initial injury. Green-yellow coloring is the next stage. The body begins to break down hemoglobin, releasing compounds that make the bruise appear green or yellow, and this stage typically occurs within 5 to 10 days. The next stage, you guys, is a yellowish brown or light brown stage. As the bruise continues to heal, it may turn this color, and the yellowish brown stage typically occurs between 10 to 14 days after the injury. The final stage of a bruise is the fading stage. And the entire healing process typically takes around 2 weeks. Now let's go back to what Dr. Shakir testified to observing regarding Sophia's external examination. He testified to 1 purple and 3 faint purple bruises on her head. According to many articles I researched, the purple stage is typically 1 to 2 days after the initial injury. So according to this research, Sophia's head injuries would have happened on either November 13 or 14. He also testified to purple and faint purple bruising on Sophia's trunk, which indicates a possibility of injury occurring on November 13 or 14. Take a look at what Jennifer says happened on the evening of November 13.
And then what happened?
He's like, "You're done," and he like yanks her off and like throws it, like, I don't know, it's like throwing her / dropping her kind of on the ground, like the floor, and puts a diaper on her. First he smacks her butt some more and then puts a diaper on her and puts her pants on and takes her back to the bedroom. He has her like, her head's like hanging down here, and he's like smacking her butt while it's like up here. And she just keeps on crying.
But you said that he abruptly threw her on her potty chair, right?
Yeah, and then she went go crying, and then he picked her up and smacked her butt and put a diaper on her and put her pants back on and threw her up over his shoulder and took her back to bed. And he was smacking her and smacking her butt. It was like 10 times, if not more, right in a row.
And as far as Sophia's arms and legs, Dr. Shakir testified to 1 faint purple bruise, 1 purple-brown bruise, 1 faint red-brown bruise, and a faint blue bruise, and a faint red bruise. Again, according to my research, it appears each of these injuries occurred between November 2nd and the 14th, with the faint red bruise possibly occurring on the 15th. And that bruise, the red one, the faint red one, was located on her lateral left side. Another thing I think is really important is that the coloration is all based on personal opinion. The same bruise on Sophia's forehead that Dr. Shakir testified to as being purple or faint purple, the primary nurse, Mary Beth Eckert, wrote was yellow in her assessment when Sophia was brought to Du Bois Regional Medical Center on November 14. How come none of this was brought up in court? Adelaide Eichman was called as the next witness. She testified to working at Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh in the Child Advocacy Center, and that she's a pediatrician. She stated, quote, "My role is to help lend my expertise to determine if there has been abuse or neglect. And in order to do that, I will examine the child. I will do a review of their records. I will look at head scans and radiologic studies. And I talk to a number of physicians at the hospital to ensure that I am getting the right information," end quote. Eichman claimed to have followed all of that protocol in providing a consult for Sophia Hoffman. Shaw asked her to explain Commonwealth 25, which is her curriculum vitae. It outlines her educational, employment, and professional history. Eichman stated that she had testified in court, quote, "upwards of 20, perhaps 30 times," end quote. She went on to tell the jurors that after she was assigned to Sophia's case, she looked at her head imaging and x-rays that had been done at the Children's Hospital. And then she recalled seeing Sophia at the ICU. After observing her head to toe Adelaide Eichman testified to getting a history from family members or any caretakers. Eichman created a PowerPoint presentation of Sophia's injuries and medical information. I will show you each slide of the PowerPoint that was shown to the jury, minus a couple that show Sophia's face. I did not meet the family the first day that I saw the child, but I believe it was the next day that everybody was there at the bedside, and I was able to speak with the child's father. I always like to speak to the caretakers and see if the child has been ill. Have they been to the hospital? And those routine questions. I spoke to the child's father, who said that she had been perfectly fine about 6 days before she came to the hospital. And then at the beginning of the week, she started to get ill. The father wasn't sure exactly what day, but the child seemed pale and wasn't acting like herself. He thought she was starting to get the flu. The child came, just as a point of reference, came to our hospital on November 15. So on Wednesday the 13th, the child started to spit up and had some vomit. And again, she was tired, but able to walk and talk, and she was eating. The next day was Thursday the 14th, and the child was dropped with paternal grandfather. So dad's dad was watching her for a little bit. And there, they noticed she was vomiting more. So the child's father picked her up from the grandfather's and brought her to the hospital. And at that point, she went to Du Bois Regional Medical Center. She was observed, meaning she was watched in the emergency room. The physician there felt like she was doing okay. She didn't need any blood work or x-rays or anything like that. Then she was discharged from the emergency room. The father was clear that they went home. They probably got home around 9:30, and she was really acting like herself, and she went to bed in her pack and play. She did not want to go to the bathroom before she went to bed. Father said he had last seen her at 4:55 a.m. on Friday the 15th. He said he checked on her, she was sleeping, but she looked okay, and then he left for work. It's always important for me to figure out, as I was saying, when the child was last okay, and whether that was helpful to find out that she was a little sick, but pretty much like herself. I did try to get a history of any other illnesses that the child had. Did the child have any injuries? The father had said that at the beginning of October 2014, the child had raccoon eyes. I asked him to specify what he meant. He said she had kind of rings around her eyes or black eyes. She was reportedly taken to Clearfield Hospital. I don't have those records, but father said that she had some medical workup. She had head imaging and blood work, and everything was okay, is what father had told. Father had also noted about in October, the child started to lose her hair. There was a step-grandmother that brought her to the doctor to figure out what was happening, and the family was told she had alopecia. That's a fancy word for hair loss. They weren't sure why this was happening, but it was noted. I always ask, does the baby pull her own hair? The father said she used to do it, but she stopped that before then. I did also speak with the father's paramour, the father's girlfriend, who was with the child on the day that she came to the hospital. Father's girlfriend said she had woke her up around 7 a.m. The dog was barking. At 7:30, she went to check on Sophia. Sophia was awake. They were looking around in her pack and play for her cup she had gone to bed with. And then they went from the pack and play and went to the living room, is what she told me. The child was able to walk, and she was able to talk, and all of that seemed okay. The child then, they were going through the morning routine of the child was going to the potty, and father's paramour started to get the child dressed. She put on her pants and her socks and her pull-up or her diaper. And when she was putting on her shirt, the child fainted, is what I was told. I said, "What do you mean by fainted?" The father's paramour said the child was pale. She wasn't moving, and her eyes were half closed. She said that she put the child on the couch. She held her hand on the child's chest, and the child was breathing funny. She would take 3 or 4 breaths and then pause and not take a breath. And she was making weird snoring or wheezing noises. She did touch the child's hand, and the child moved her hand a little bit, but otherwise the child was not moving. Then she had drool and spit coming out of her mouth. Father's paramour then called several people. I forgot to mention. This was on a previous slide. This had happened around 7:30, 7:45. The ambulance was then called at 8:45 a.m., and EMS came to the home and then the child was brought to Clearfield Hospital. So to make things clear, there were a couple of hospitals involved. I put in the dates that the child went to each hospital, and I will discuss what I read in those medical reports. So, as I had said before, father said that he took the child to the hospital on November 14. That evening, went to Du Bois Medical Center and described the child as having the raccoon eyes like he had told me. The child was noted to appear ill. She had some bruising on her forehead, but she was watched in the hospital. And again, she did not have any blood work. She did not have any images, and she was discharged. This is, again, from the hospital perspective, how everything kind of played out. So Friday morning, which was the 15th, after EMS arrived at the home, they took the child to Clearfield Hospital. She arrived at 9:30 a.m., and the child was unresponsive, meaning she wasn't moving. She wasn't answering questions. She wasn't acting right. The child was cold. She had a low temperature. Just for reference, 35 degrees Celsius is quite low. Most of us are about 37 degrees Celsius. So she was cold. It seemed like there was a problem in her head, and I will show you the head scan. The child did have bruising noted on her forehead and on her cheek and on her chin. This is what the emergency room doctor, this is the information that he had gotten from the child's father. So there was a story that the child in October had hit her head on the coffee table, and she had been seen the night before. She did not get any repeat imaging, and reportedly had been okay this morning, but then became unresponsive and wasn't breathing normally while at home. And this was the description of her vital signs, of her breathing and her heart rate. So this was a description, a physical exam that the physician did. So that child appeared ill. She was not breathing right. She is breathing very slowly. She is not responsive. And then it basically translates all of this. So subtle ecchymosis, meaning the child had bruising to her left temple area. The child had a scratch to her right cheek, and she had some bruising on her shins. What else? She had foaming oral secretions, meaning, as the paramour described, she had spit coming out of her mouth. And what this means is she was unresponsive to deep pain, except when she had a Foley catheter placed. So when a catheter was put in her, she moved a little bit, but otherwise she was not responding. So the child was intubated. A breathing tube was placed in her throat, and as I said, she was flown to Children's Hospital. So I included here a head scan of the child. She had a CT scan of her head. And just to orient everyone, the child was laying on her back when this was done. When she was put through the scanner, this is kind of a mirror image. This R means that's the right side of her. She was laying on her back. This was the right side, and this the left side of her. All of this white, this brown white area here is the child's skull. She did not have any skull fractures. All this gray in here is the child's brain. So a couple of things I noticed right away is that her brain is swollen. The medical term for that is edema. She had brain swelling. Usually, there is more space between the brain and the skull. Another thing I noticed is this white here is blood. So the child has blood on the brain. This is just one snapshot of the CT. There were many more images. This is just one snapshot. As we went through the images, and I went to see the radiologist who looked at this, it was found that the child had subdural hemorrhages. So the child had bleeding on her brain, and she had it on both sides of her brain. So you might see here bilateral subdural hematoma. That is saying that the child had bleeding on both sides of her brain. And then she also had the brain edema, which is the brain swelling. So those are the two things we can quickly see from this image. All right, so it's always important for me to know, does this child have a medical problem that made her get so sick so suddenly? I did get medical history from the child's father. He said he did not know very much about the mother's pregnancy, but he knew that the mother was on Subutex, and he thinks the child was in the hospital after she was born to watch her for a little bit. She had gotten most of her shots, and this was her doctor at the time. I always like to know who a child lives with, so her father told me that when she was a baby first born, she lived with her mom for some time. And then recently, CYS had been involved at one point, and then recently, the child had been living with her father. Then her father told me that he and his girlfriend had been dating since July, and his girlfriend had moved in around September of 2013. I always like to see if anything would run in the family that could explain the child's symptoms and what we are seeing. And this is all per the baby's father. He said he was healthy. He thought the child's mother used substances, and he wasn't really sure of her medical history. And then there were some adults in the family that had aneurysms, but nothing in children. It seemed like the children in the family were healthy. So in here, like I said, I examined kids head to toe. This is the exam I did on the child. I checked her head to toe. What I noted was that she was very ill. She was in the intensive care unit. She had a breathing tube in. Her pupils were not acting right. From head to toe, she had a bruise on her forehead on the right side. She had a small bruise on the left temple on the left side of her forehead. The child had a lot of hair loss at the back of her head. She had bald patches. And to kind of summarize this, she was quite ill. She also had a bruise on her chest. And I have some pictures of these. So this is the child. This was her with the breathing tube. And also had a neck collar on her. And the child had bruising. And I will show you those. But she did have a little cut up here in her mouth. And that's where the breathing tube is going. And that's all the tape to keep the breathing tube in place. This is the back of the child's head. This is her collar to keep her neck straight. And looking at the back of her head, she had big bald patches on both sides. Lots and lots of hair loss in the back of her head. These were some of the bruises on her. She had a bruise to her right forehead and then a small bruise to her left temple forehead. This is the child's chest. So that's her belly button. Up here is where the neck collar is. Here is her chest, and down here would be her belly. And the child had a bruise on the right side of her chest. So again, this is actually another head CT that the child had, and it showed the swelling of the brain had gotten worse since the first scan at Clearfield Hospital. And the child was also found to have the bilateral subdural hematoma. By that, I mean the bleeding on both sides of her brain. The child also had x-rays and a scan of her belly, and those showed us that she was quite ill, but she did not have any injuries in her belly. The child had an eye exam, and I said her pupils weren't working right because she was so sick, and because the pressure in her head was so high, so the eye doctor looked at the back of her eye. And I always explain to the families, when we have a child who is bleeding on the brain, you want to see if they were bleeding on the back of the eye as well. The eye doctor will, if you have ever been to an eye doctor, they will shine a light in and try to take pictures if they can. I will show you those pictures and explain what it means. The child had something called retinal hemorrhages. And hemorrhages is just a fancy word for bleeding. And retina is at the back of your eye. Everybody here has retinas. So the child had bleeding at the back of her eyes. She had it on both eyes. She had many, many, many retinal hemorrhages. She also had something called ischemia. Basically, blood hadn't flown there correctly. I will show you pictures. This is a bit fuzzy. I apologize. This is the picture of the child's back of her head. And usually, the retina is about this color, that salmon color. Anytime you see these dark red or maroon blotches, those are retinal hemorrhages. That's the bleeding in the back of her eyes. We are not supposed to have any of that. All of her eye should be that salmon color. So the child had lots of these retinal hemorrhages throughout both of her eyes. So that told us that she did have bleeding in the back of her eyes, both of them. This is another one. Again, typically eyes are about this salmon color. We all have veins and arteries in the back of our eyes, but she also has lots of retinal hemorrhages. That's what all the maroon blotches are. When I'm called because somebody is worried that a child is abused or neglected, I try to put all the pieces together. Again, I try to understand, did the child have a medical problem? I try to look at that information and put the pieces together. But it was my assessment that the child was the victim of child abuse. Specifically, the child had those subdural hemorrhages. She was bleeding on her brain. She had swelling of her brain, and she had retinal hemorrhages in both of her eyes. Depending on the context, it could mean different things. In this context, it meant that the child had been abused, and that the specific type of child abuse that is my assessment this child suffered was called abusive head trauma. That used to be called shaken baby syndrome. The term is now abusive head trauma. So this child was in the intensive care unit because she had been abused. So the child had been hurt by a caretaker. Somebody taking care of her had hurt her and basically put her in critical condition. That was the head injury that the child sustained. So the bleeding on her head and the swelling of her brain, as well as the bleeding in the back of her eyes. This slideshow really pisses me off. Much more in an upcoming episode. I cannot believe Adelaide Eichman is still working in the medical field. She should be in jail, in my opinion. Shaw asked Adelaide Eichman how long it would take to be symptomatic with an injury like that. To which she told the jury, quote, "I would say it would happen very quickly. I was told that the child had been able to walk and talk. And when she sustained this injury, when she got that bad injury to her head, it would have been obvious that she was hurt very quickly. I would say minutes likely. The abuse caused her head injury," end quote. And then she went on to testify, quote, "So abusive head trauma is defined as, well, it can be a shaking mechanism, or it can be a hit to the head. It could be both. So the child, somebody hurt the child," end quote. And then this happened.
How about if the defendant in this case made a statement? "I was changing Sophia's diaper. I lifted her up, and her head struck the coffee table when I was lifting her up, and she went unconscious." Would that be consistent with the injury that you saw or observed?
No. Sophia's injuries were much worse, much more dramatic than a bump to the head from a coffee table.
How about we saw the one scan that showed multiple areas where there was bleeding on the brain?
Right?
Does that suggest to you, or are you able to say there was more than one trauma point? In other words, there are more than one injury to her head.
The nature of her injuries, the fact they were on both sides of her head, that does not happen from one bump to the head.
So the multiple bruises that you showed on the slides,
The bleeding on the brain, again, is not caused by just one bump to the head.
multiple traumas.
Yes. And now Donaldson for the cross. He questioned Eichman about the difference in brain swelling from one hospital to the next. Clearfield scans and Pittsburgh scans. She confirmed that, quote, from one head CT to the next one, the child had a lot more swelling. Both were taken November 15, end quote. And she agreed that the swelling in Sophia's brain continued to grow between the time that she left Clearfield and got to Pittsburgh.
You indicated that this abusive head trauma, from your opinion, would have happened in minutes. Is it possible that there was kind of a culmination of prior sorts of injuries to the head, and then all of a sudden on November 15th, or whatever day, that there was one more injury that really kind of resulted in the overall opinion that it was abusive head trauma?
That's a good question. I think the severity of the child's brain injury. She started to have symptoms very quickly after getting that brain injury, which is why I always ask families, is the child able to walk or talk, for instance? Because once she got that brain injury, I don't think she would have been able to do those things. So I think she got the injury right before she had the symptoms.
But, again, going to the medical history that you gave, you indicated there had been some report of an October 8th incident where Sophia struck her head on the coffee table.
So I don't believe that the symptoms that the child had on November 15th would be explained by the October coffee table.
So, right. I guess my question I'm trying to ask is, what I'm trying to get at, could there have been a series of events that occurred prior to November 15th, and November 15th was kind of like the capstone? That would be the real, again, as I said, capstone to these other injuries that would have resulted in your opinion.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
What I'm saying is, based upon the history from October 8th and other things that occurred during the period from October 8th to November 15th, could the November 15th incident have been the final straw, so to speak, that would have caused this abusive head trauma?
I don't think so. I think that something different had happened right before she had her symptoms.
Okay, so you're saying that a single incident or a couple incidents on November the 15th,
I believe so,
is what caused this based upon your...
Correct. Just to clarify, what I'm saying is I don't think there was a culmination.
Okay, you used the phrase that a caregiver caused this abusive head trauma. How do you know it was a caregiver?
By that I don't mean to parse words, but I mean that this injury was caused by someone else. I don't think that the child did this to herself.
But not necessarily a caregiver. But that was the phrase you used.
Correct. In redirect, Shaw confirmed with Eichman that someone other than Sophia caused the injury, the blunt force trauma to the head. He asked her about Sophia's hair loss and what could have caused it. Adelaide Eichman responded, quote, "Hair can be pulled out. Hair can fall out from stress or from a medical problem. So the child is being abused. That could cause stress. And sometimes it can cause hair loss," end quote. Donaldson had a follow-up during recross. He wanted to know if the injuries to her head, the abusive head trauma, could be the cause of hair loss in this case. Eichman's response, quote, "The bleed on her brain did not cause the hair loss, if that's what your question. I don't know if there was an action performed on the child that caused both of those things to happen," end quote. And then, you guys, the judge, Frederick Ammerman, appears to me to have tried to taint the jury even more. He asked this of the witness, Adelaide Eichman. He asked if she could explain to the jury why this condition was previously called shaken baby syndrome. No, Ammerman, no. That is not your role. Shockingly, Donaldson asked to approach for a sidebar. He thought this question may prejudice his client. Ammerman's response, quote, "Well, I can clarify. I'm not asking her about this case. I'm only asking her to describe that in general," end quote. To which Donaldson was satisfied. Absolutely ridiculous, in my opinion. Go have lunch with her and ask her questions you're curious about, Ammerman. Or go home and Google it. During a trial is not the time for a judge to play these shenanigans. I wonder if Ammerman was trying to get the term shaken baby syndrome into the jurors' minds. According to the trial transcript, after the sidebar conversation, the judge, Frederick Ammerman, said the following.
Ma'am, let me clarify the question that I asked you. I'm not asking you to describe shaken baby syndrome in regards to this case. I'm only asking you in general medical terms and not specific to this case at all.
Okay.
Why did the medical people, such as yourself, previously refer to this condition as shaken baby syndrome? Could you do that for the jury, please?
Sure. So, a lot of people are familiar with the term shaken baby syndrome. And as we have learned over time, and from looking at children that have been injured, is that they often have been injured in more way than one. And I had answered a question before and said it's sometimes hard to imagine how people hurt children. because it's not something that we would normally think about. So previously, we had focused on the shaking or shearing injury to a child. So if somebody shook a baby, that could cause bleeding on the brain. Often, if somebody is violent, they will hurt a child in multiple ways. So we also are seeing children that had blows to the head. So their head was hit on something and they were shaken, or their head was hit on something and they were just shaken. So the term abusive head trauma is really, it's an umbrella term for all the types of ways that people hurt children. So it's a more inclusive term, if that makes sense. But everybody is familiar with shaken baby syndrome. That's just a more updated term. Does that clarify things?
I think that's helpful. Mr. Shaw or Donaldson, do you have any follow-up questions?
And she was excused from the witness stand. Before I wrap up this episode, I'd like to fill you in on something I learned about Adelaide Eichman. While speaking to attorney Mark Freeman regarding Jennifer's case, he informed me that he filed a complaint for a client of his against Adelaide Eichman, citing false allegations that their son had been abused based on the presence of 4 bruises. In it, the complaint states that Dr. Adelaide Eichman, quote, violated the plaintiff's right to substantive due process when she leapt to the conclusion of child abuse without performing a meaningful workup for alternative causes of the bruising, while ignoring a bruise documented to have occurred in the hospital from the blood pressure cuff. Dr. Eichman claimed to have considered and rejected a bleeding disorder as the cause of the 4 bruises, stating that the child does not have an underlying medical condition that would make him prone to bruising, when she failed to test the child for platelet disorder and failed to refer the child to a hematologist for a bleeding disorder evaluation. The child was subsequently diagnosed with a bleeding disorder that causes easy bruising, after which the dependency and the criminal charges were then withdrawn, end quote. As a result of Adelaide Eichman's negligence, the child's father was charged with 1 count of aggravated assault and 1 count of endangering the welfare of a child. He spent a night in jail and was released on bond the next day with the condition that he have no contact with any children, including his own children. According to the complaint filed by attorney Mark Freeman, just some of what this child's mother and father endured. 133 days impairment of the care, custody, and control of their children. 133 days the father was prohibited from having unsupervised contact with his children. 97 days of the father's liberty being impaired as a result of his arrest and conditions of bail. Approximately 37 unconstitutional intrusions into the privacy of their home. Emotional distress for being falsely accused of abusing their child. All of this and so much more due to Adelaide Eichman's false allegations of child abuse. According to the complaint, when asked if she accepts that she was incorrect, Eichman admitted under oath, quote, absolutely. I mean, I will shout it from the rooftops. I do not take this lightly, and that was a very big deal. So I felt terrible about that. But, you know, diagnosing child abuse is a very big deal, end quote. So this is the same doctor that, according to a report completed by Trooper Justin Jones on the weekend of November 16-17 of 2013, he writes that he spoke with Dr. Adelaide Eichman and, quote, she related that she observed a small bruise on each side of the victim's head and furthered that from her evaluation, this was from being violently shaken. and that after receiving the injury, the victim would have went unresponsive within minutes. End quote. During this phone call, Eichman told Trooper Jones that they were going to do 2 brain death tests in order to declare Sophia Hoffman brain dead. I want to know what kind of training Eichman received to be able to conclude that a small bruise on each side of Sophia's head was from being violently shaken. How do you know that? Adelaide Eichman told Jones that Sophia's death was a result of being violently shaken prior to her autopsy being performed, which showed no fractures or dislocations of Sophia's neck and spine, and prior to reviewing all of her medical history records. And it appears to be prior to considering any other possible cause of death. Sounds like another lawsuit to me. Remember when this same doctor, Adelaide Eichman, testified under oath, quote, "My role is to help lend my expertise to determine if there has been abuse or neglect. And in order to do that, I will examine the child. I will do a review of their records. I will look at the head scans and radiologic studies. And I talk to a number of other physicians at the hospital to ensure that I am getting the right information," end quote. To which Eichman claimed to have done all of that protocol and providing a consult for Sophia Hoffman. I'd love to know the number of other physicians that she talked with. And I know for a fact she didn't review all of Sophia's medical records prior to her chat with Justin Jones, because it wasn't until February 20th, 2014 that the search warrant for Sophia's medical records from DRMC was approved and signed by Magistrate Patrick Ford. And it wasn't until May 30th, 2014 that the search warrant for her Clearfield Hospital medical records was signed by Magistrate Ireland's office. It's written in the police report that on the weekend of November 16 and 17, 2013, Dr. Adelaide Eichman told Pennsylvania State Trooper Justin Jones that she, quote, observed a small bruise on each side of the victim's head and furthered that this was from being shaken violently, end quote. How in the hell does she have the training to say that when someone's life is on the line? I will leave you with some reviews that I found discussing Adelaide Eichman and her expertise. Quote, "A loose cannon in regard to identifying common toddler injuries as a child abuse and or blaming these injuries on parents without evidence. Accused me of hurting a child, spurring endangering the welfare of child charges, withdrawn, and indicated child line that was also expunged by the state. Record cleared in my case, but my concern for other parents with less ability to defend themselves stands. I was a foster parent who utilized the clinic for 4 years, bringing 7 medically fragile infants for PC," end quote. Next one. Quote, "Do your research. This medical professional has wrongfully accused many families of child abuse without evidence. She is extremely opinionated and has hurt many families that did not endanger their children in any way, shape, or form. Extremely accusatory, very rude, and will not apologize to a family if medical findings show her opinion is incorrect. CYS does not like to deal with her and warned us as a family that they do not like her, nor do they value her opinion. I'm happy to have gotten through this without my daughter taken away, as she was diagnosed with a bleeding disorder and an irregular collagen deficiency, which resulted in an easily broken arm. Other families have not been lucky enough. It was a year of hell that I do not wish on any family. Always get a second opinion and have an attorney present if dealing with this doctor, end quote. Quote, she said, wrong diagnosis for my child, end quote. Quote, we write this with the most sincere hopes that our message reaches parents with the utmost warning about Adelaide Eichman, a UPMC employee who has traumatized a countless number of families seeking medical attention in the ER for their children at UPMC Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh with false accusations of child abuse. Eichman has been continually allowed to abuse her own medical privilege by falsifying child abuse claims without proper reasoning and putting families through irreparable pain and suffering. If your child is sick or has an injury, do not take them to Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, where this physician will immediately file a claim of suspected child abuse. This woman has been allowed to terrorize so many families that even the local police department advises people against taking their kids to Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh for medical attention. Adelaide's malpractice and insurance fraud has been reported to UPMC multiple times with zero response and no action taken, end quote. Quote, long wait, not friendly. Should have sued her for malpractice as she wrongfully accused my wife and I of child abuse, when in fact, my daughter had a bleeding disorder. Beware of her and do your research, end quote. And you guys, those are not reviews from the same person over and over again. I have reached out to Adelaide Eichman for comment, and at this time, I haven't heard back. Next time on Can't Stop, Won't Stop Warriors, the prosecution's expert witness, Harry Camero, is called to the stand. So many people have failed Sophia Margaret Hoffman. And you guys, as of this episode, Jennifer MEDZIE is still the only person to be convicted for this sweet baby girl's death. Jennifer is currently sitting in SCI Cambridge, serving a 20 to 40 year sentence for third-degree murder. She has been there for over 9 years. Thank you for your support, and please don't forget to like and subscribe to Can't Stop, Won't Stop Warriors. That's a free and really easy way to help get awareness out about the corruption happening throughout this country. I appreciate you.
And I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day.